All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is July 22nd, 2020, and I'm back with another edition of the Wednesday live show. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it. And we're going to take a look at some interesting stuff today, mainly these open positions that we've had going here. And we're right in the thick of earnings season right now. And so what you're going to see is over the next couple of weeks, you'll see a lot of the open positions get closed ahead of earnings, right? And so that's something that we've always done since the beginning of the launch of the new system, as you know, because hey, holding the stock over earnings is sort of a crapshoot, right? And a lot of people I know, people like to trade earnings when the company releases, and then the stock goes crazy after hours, and people trade that, and then you get up the next morning, and a lot of stocks they make significant moves after hours, but it's really just sort of a roll of the dice. You don't know if the stock's gonna, and a lot of times, it'll spike up significantly and then drop, and then you get up the next morning and you got no idea whether it's going to be up or down 10% or more. So essentially, excuse me, for swing trading purposes, for the purposes of the system, we prefer to not roll the dice, and we go ahead and close the positions ahead of earnings. So anyway, with that said, there will be a note on the home page of when you first log in, the homepage of the service there, and it will show you which stocks are getting closed that particular day ahead of earnings. I post them there, and I believe next week really sort of kicks it off. So, and what we do is we assume that we're going to close the position right at the open the day ahead of earnings. So if a company were releasing earnings today, say after the market close, after the bell, then we would use today's open price as the price that we close the position at. So other than earnings, other than closing a stock ahead of earnings, the only time that an open position gets closed is when it hits the trailing stop. So I guess you guys all know that, but without further ado, let's take a quick look at the overall market here. The S&P. S&P is battling with this was the beginning of the pandemic gap, right? And so it's rallied all the way back up here, which is kind of an overhead resistance area, and it's managing to sort of try and push its way through there. It'd be interesting to see if it can close that gap, right? Extraordinarily strong given the news cycle, but then again, it is what it is. All right, so let's take a look at the old SPX here. Same sort of thing. I just don't have a whole bunch of marks here, but same sort of thing. Anything obviously can happen here, and so you could have a all day long debate between a bull and a bear about why this market is so resilient, and why the days are numbered in this rally, but it is what it is. And of course, the system, that's what's great about having an actual system, right? Is it's agnostic when it comes to all the news, and and what's going on, and the fundamentals, and the stuff that hits the wire, the whole thing. I mean, basically the system is programmed to look at price action, and obviously look at individual scan through individual stocks, look at stocks that are in good solid primary uptrends, and attempt to catch a good entry on the swing cycle. And so I mean that's it. And the market being as resilient as it has been, the system's been, and so, I've said this before on the show. I come on here and, and I'm, like typically normal sort of thoughts about the market are to be cautious because of all the crazy stuff going on, right? There's so much going on, and the unemployment numbers and the pandemic and the shutdowns and the and all this crazy stuff that's happening out there in the world would lead one to a rational person would think, well, geez, um, the stock market, how can the stock market be going up? But it is, right? And on the other side of the coin, you got the Fed and, interest rates at zero and all that good stuff. So, anyway, I'm not going to get into all that because what the system is designed to do is to trade at price action exclusively. And here we are. Here is our open trades. I don't know what that weird line is. It just showed up on my screen here, but oh well. Anyway, so, here's our open trades. And look at the gains on some of these things, especially the ones that have been open for a while. And what you'll see here in a minute when I go through these is that some of these are, well, some of these stocks are going to be coming out with earnings over the next couple of weeks, right? So, and some of them, the stops have been really, really tightened up. The system has a function built in where it actually, the stop starts off kind of wide at the bottom of the pattern, and then it's a function of price and time, the price movement and time. And then as time goes on, you can see that, these first few trades here have been open for, well, the first couple have been open for almost a month, right? Or longer than a month, I should say. And then these have been open about a month. So, um, and the way that the system works, obviously, is, and you guys know this, is that like you go over here to the closed trades. So the ones that keep going up, the system sticks with them, right? And the ones that like here's one that got closed recently. It was up as much as 7.5%, but then it had a pullback and hit the trailing stop, and so that's just and so the ones that stay open are the ones that have the mojo going. Well, I meant to go back to the open trades there. And so anyway, some of these just have had incredible runs, and take a look at that here in a second. I think what I wanted to mention first is XOP. Let's take a look at that because that's triggering today in theory. Now I'm looking over at my Thinkorswim screen and I see it's down a couple of percent. So um, take a quick look at XOP here. And one of the important things here to realize is this. Look, let's see what the high today is. Okay, so this is a great example here. The trigger price is 52.90, right? And I just happened to, the trigger price is 52.90. So yesterday we got a close over 52.90, which puts it on the triggered today list, right? And so you get up in the morning, you look at the triggered today list, and you're like, okay, XOP, looking for, and typically, I mean, I'm going to say like 80 to 90% of the time, the following day the stock will be trading above the trigger price, and so whatever the open is the following day after it triggers, then you jump in. But here's a sort of a special case, and this is important too because great example. This doesn't happen very often, and so it's a perfect time to look at this. XOP will only actually be a valid open trade if today it trades at or above the trigger price. And so you can see that the high today is 52.86, the open 52.84, and so unless this trades over the trigger price, then it is not going to, it will actually come off of the open trades list. The system automatically just puts them on the open trades list the morning that they're triggering in, because like I said, 90% of the time they actually, they at least trade, a couple of pennies above, if not, well above, right? I mean, you can see the close yesterday. So this is going to be an interesting case, right? That's a pretty good setup, to be honest with you. Energy stocks were strong. This is an ETF for the um, oil and gas exploration and production ETF. You can see that. So kind of a cool setup actually, and a lot of energy stocks have this really sweet sort of bottoming pattern, but the system goes by numbers, and of course this could easily turn around today. So basically, what you want to take away from this is that setting a you could set a limit order to enter at 52, just good for today, of course, because we don't know what it's what the system's going to do with it if it does not trigger. It definitely won't be on the open trades, but anyway, you could set a limit order for 52.91, good for the day, and we'll see if it turns around. If it's getting ready to, like over here, it kind of had a little sell off and then sort of had like this little rebound, which looked pretty decent. Back over here in late June, early July, had this little rebound, and it could have cupped up right there, but took another leg down. And so this time, I mean, it kind of looks like a turnaround, and a lot of the energy stocks I was looking at yesterday kind of looked like turnarounds, but of course that could, it can always be a fake out. You get this little rally. You do have a higher high than back over here where this trend line got broken. So anyway, we'll have to see. But theoretically this is, on the triggered today list. So what I wanted to do, and there's all the particulars on it, by the way. um, there's where the trailing stop would go. The target would be 60, which is I'm not going to mark that on here just yet. So, but anyway, I wanted to jam through the current open trades down here and and just take a look at where we are. And like I said earlier, some of the stops have been moved up significantly, and kind of important because we're going to probably see within the next couple of days, by the end of the week, we're going to see several of these things close. So we start at the bottom with the oldest open trade, QDEL, which, by the way, is, and I mentioned this last week, is they do blood tests, right? So I don't even need to do any research to have the idea that these guys are probably supplying COVID vaccine or COVID blood tests, right? COVID tests. And so, I mean, this stock, as of yesterday's close, now here was the trigger price way back down here, right? And I had it all marked up, and of course, we talked about the pattern and all the good stuff at the time it triggered. But look at the target here. This is another reason why, it's in certain environments, yeah, it might be a decent idea to, and sell at the target and just take it off or whatever. But we've always recommended and especially as I've been mentioning with zero commissions nowadays, there's no reason not to sort of take advantage of that by scaling into and or out of, and especially out of, a swing trade, right? So in theory, this hit the target so quick that and it closed so far above the target the first day that would have probably been an opportunity to peel off maybe half and then let the other half ride with the trailing stop. And then occasionally you'll latch onto one like this, which is up, 57% as of yesterday's close. That was as of yesterday's close when it looked like it was going to kind of roll over. And then, of course, this morning, it's up another 3.5% as we speak, right? You can see that up there. Can you see that? No, you can't see that. Well, anyways, trust me, it's up. I looked over at my Thinkorswim, and then I realized that up here at the top of the screen, like kind of off the top of the screen, it shows that this thing is up $9 today, right? So anyway, you're looking at if it closed right here, it'd be up 60% from the trigger price, and this one actually happened to trigger in like this was a trigger day, and so it triggered in like basically right in the vicinity of the trigger price. So you guys have heard me mention this before. Don't overthink the trigger price or think you got to get in at the exact trigger price, because as you see, like when when a trade works out like this one did, and in theory, this is how they're supposed to work. Of course, you can't obviously expect every swing trade you get into to go up 60%, but this is just a good demonstration of like not sweating the nickels and dimes when it comes to pulling the trigger on the entry, right? So if it's over the trigger price the following morning, the day that it's triggering in today, then pull the trigger, right? And so, I mean, if it's too far away, like there's some of them that get gapped up significantly that you'll see, then you take half an entry on the gap, and then you'd set a limit order for the other half. And then if you only get filled half, then you just have a smaller position size, which is totally no big deal, but you're still along for the ride. So anyway, QDEL, absolute thing of beauty. Earnings are on 7:30, right? So that's what, next Thursday? And they're after the market closes. So regardless of what happens with this stock, it's going to get closed on 7:30 if it's still open. But you can see the progression of the trailing stop, and it's pretty tight up there, right? If if today would have been like another down day, then it would have very likely tagged that stop. But you can see how I see this a lot lately. Stocks look like, they look like yesterday and the day before kind of looked like sort of a topping pattern after a big run. And you can see that a lot of these really strong stocks, they look like they're going to reverse, and then they just keep climbing, right? So that's a pretty good example. So let's move on here. The next one is not quite as exciting. It's WERN, which is a trucking company. Still kind of a neat pattern, right? I looked at this pattern when it triggered in, uptrend, real nice pullback, and then it spent a lot of time just chopping around sideways. Interestingly enough, the trailing stop just hung back enough. This trailing stop likely went in after this day, right? So when it was waffling around sideways here, this trailing stop just kind of hung out right here and got a little bit of a rally and a pullback. And then the close of this particular day, 7:14, that's where the stop would have ratcheted up to right underneath there. And so here you go. Here's the target up here. I talked about how this is not an extremely high beta stock, right? The ranges are kind of tight, but anyway, got a nice little kind of a high tight flag if you just look at the past few days here. So target within sight. So anyways, this is just using just gut feel here. This is probably not one that you would expect to, although boy, that prior run there, I mean, that was a significant move, but then again, the overall market probably carried it along. So I would say this one's got a pretty good chance of hitting the target there. So we'll have to see. Of course, last time, it looked like it was headed for that and then sort of took a dive. So anyway, not the most exciting stock in the open trades, but so far so good, right? I mean, it triggered in, right at the trigger price, and it's a couple of bucks above it and looking pretty good. So can't complain about that. Um, Moving on, another one of the monsters. Well, I can tell you this, in the 2 years that we've had this new system out, this is the biggest gain that we've ever had, I think. Pretty sure. I don't know, there was a really good one in Twilio last year, but so LRN is online education, right? So this got opened back here. Geez, what's the date on this? 619. 619 was trigger. I guess that would have been on a Friday. It triggered by closing over it, and so the following Monday morning, it was a buy at the open, like right. I can't. This chart is so just the way that it's gone up so much, it's hard to even go back. But anyway, so that was trigger price right back there, and there was the initial stop, which was super tight at the time, right? I mean, it was literally like just under the previous day's low, so that's kind of interesting. Um, sometimes the initial stop goes under the low of the the pattern, which is like back. What's even more interesting about this one is we had a swing trade in this back in May that worked out pretty good, right? Went through the target and hit the trailing stop above the target, and then literally like a week later it re-engaged, and you can see what happened. And so there you go. I mean, look at where the target is here. It's incredible. So it triggered in, and it's because of the move that it's made that all this just kind of looks like nothing. But trust me, like back then, it was fairly significant. Anyway, long story short, you can see the progression of the trailing stop here, and you can see that just a week ago, around a week ago, is when this thing really started making a parabolic move, so to speak. And so here we go. Look at how that stop tightened up. And I was looking back through thinking I missed a trailing stop, in here, right? But I didn't. So that's kind of interesting too. Like I said, the trailing stops kind of is a function of price and time. And the system is pretty smart. It knows what it's doing. And so after this long range day here, basically the stop got tucked right under that. And then the following day, another big long range day, the stop, jumped right to underneath that. And look at this little sort of pullback here. And so the current trailing stop on this, $44. And is another one that's made a parabolic move and then looked like a reversal pattern, and lo and behold it's still climbing as we speak. So as of yesterday's close, this was up 83%, and it's up another 2% today. So well, let's see. So this is one that earnings are on 8/4, so chances are this is going to, well, I mean, it's hard to say, but chances are this will probably tag the trailing stop before it gets closed ahead of earnings. But anyway, there you go. And that just goes to show you why, taking some off the table at the target makes, I mean, that's the reason we have a target, right? The target's based on ATRs of the stock, and it's a high frequency, high probability place for the price to hit on a normal swing cycle higher. And but over a big series of trades, it pays to stick with some of these things because that's just an extraordinary move. So, and then if you guys been listening for the past couple of months or whatever, past month or two, interestingly enough, all these precious metal stocks started showing up on the pending list, and kind of took me by surprise a little bit, right? And we talked about how there was 4 or 5 different precious metal stocks. Now a couple of them got closed. They tagged the trailing stop. I think it was Barrick Gold and Newmont Mining, but and then like the second couple that triggered in are still open, and this is one of them. This is a silver stock, right? And all of a sudden today, yesterday and today, silver's going nuts. As a matter of fact, last night I saw silver was limit up in China, like on their futures exchange or whatever. But this is just, man, this is such a beautiful pattern. You guys probably, if you've been around for a while watching the shows, you probably watched me mark these lines on here when it triggered in, right? And it was just, the perfect sort of setup. Normally, normally I would say, 6 out of 10 of the swing trade setups or whatever are kind of, they can be noisy, and the chart can be kind of bunky and not really well behaved or real super clean of a pattern. But the reason I got all this, all these lines marked on here is this was really just a really clean sort of pattern, right? You had this nice uptrend in April and May, and then mid-May, you went into this pullback, right? And so I could draw a down channel on here like I had the other one, and then you kind of based out and had a little bit of a rally and came back and retested like this level here, right? And so that's kind of a real nice real nice like solid bottom. Interestingly enough, and it didn't trigger in till over here, right? It triggered in on this particular day, but the initial stop went right down there in the logical spot. And of course, the system is calculating all this just based on basically it's using open, high, low, close, right? And of course, the ranges and the ATRs and all that good stuff. But basically, it knew that the prime spot to set the initial stop at least was right down there at the bottom of the pattern. Sometimes you'll see it actually a little bit higher than that. It just depends on the price action. But long story short, you can see the trailing stop sort of progression here. You can see where, it basically, I drew this trend line, somewhere over here after it kind of traded sideways and then started climbing again. I drew this trend line. Look how good it's been holding that trend line, and look at how the trailing stops have progressed. And interestingly enough, and when I looked at last night, when I looked at this and updated the trailing stop, it's interesting how it's finally moved to the other side of this uptrend line. And the reason being is this stock is essentially going parabolic here, right? I mean, it was like kind of hugging this trend line, and now it's just going, or so far for the past 3 or 4 days, kind of going straight up. And so it really does sort of make sense to, protect yesterday's low. But you can see the stop is slightly below yesterday's low, but there you go. And so this one was up 27% as of yesterday's close. It's up another couple percent today, pulling away from the trend line, and so it makes perfect sense to have that stop. Like I said, it's a function of price and time, and so the stop is going to tighten up. The acceleration, it's going to accelerate tightening as a stock like sort of pulls away and goes parabolic when that happens, of course, right? So anyway, beautiful swing trade here, still going, and everyone's getting excited about silver now, right? So it actually, the funny thing is that that first stock we looked at was up 57%. This one's up 27%. This chart actually looks a little bit more impressive just because of the pattern, and so that's where the ranges and the ATRs and all that good stuff come into play. Like you could look at two charts without the if you took the price scale off of them. You could look at this chart and you could look at the other chart, and you would think that this one would be up more, but it's not. So anyway, moving on. The other open precious metal stock right now, Franco Nevada. These guys have been around forever. I mean, I remember the last, gold and silver bull market. This was this was a popular name. So same sort of thing here, big run up, nice pullback, trend line break here, and triggered in this day. It actually gapped a little bit over the trigger price, right? But again, not sweating the small stuff. This is kind of cool because it did trade at the trigger price too. So if you did that, like this day here, the low was 133. So if you did that thing where you jumped in half, because this open, let's see, the open was 138, so that was a pretty significant gap up, right? But just goes to show you, the problem is you really want to take the half a position at the gap up, because one of these, actually a couple of them that have made this kind of move, they never actually pulled back and tagged the exact trigger price. So in this case, it did. You'd have probably gotten filled. And so, long story short, there you go. Same sort of pattern as WPM. Big run up, pull back. You kind of had like the little double bottom there, and then it turned the corner and just, the target doesn't look like a whole lot here, right? Here's another thing that I haven't mentioned this probably in a couple of months. So for any of you new people here, something else you can do. So, say that you saw the trigger price here, 133, and then this morning, it opens $5 higher, which is, not it's not insignificant, but it's not extremely significant on a expensive stock like this. So say you did pull the trigger, whatever, and paid an extra $5. Basically, you compensate for that by it's just taking the target in equal distance, like setting your target in equal distance what you paid extra. So instead of the target being 145, if you paid an extra $5 when you entered on it, then you just make your target an extra $5, and so there you go. So that would have been target, and then you'll get the exact same percent gain that the system is calculating, because it's just using the trigger price. And so, I've also talked to members that set a limit order at the trigger price, because they like to do that. So I like the idea of take, especially when we started this, brokers still charged commissions, right? And so, you know, that was sort of an incentive to, try and get into trigger price or get in all at once. But now with the no commissions, splitting the entry in half is totally no big deal. And exiting, partial position at the target, hanging on for the rest of it. Here's another one where trailing stop is starting to really accelerate to the upside, right? So while the stock was kind of clanging around down here, you can see it was like a nice. See, the idea of the trailing stop is that it's designed to hang back enough to allow for normal price fluctuation without getting knocked out, right? And so theoretically, there's a balance there where you want to stay in the trade and let it work without getting knocked out on normal price fluctuation. But if it fails, or if you get like a partial rally, and then if it's going to reverse, you want to get out. You want the trailing stop to get you out on a reversal if it's going to go all the way back down, and that was it. So it's kind of like a fake out. So anyway, the system does a really good job of calculating these, what we call dynamic trailing stops, and so that's that. Another one working out great here. So all right, let me start moving a little bit quicker here. So I lingered because these have been just really incredible swing trades so far. Moving on, CENTA. Here's one that looks like it's just going nowhere, but it actually did hit the target. So a couple of bucks there, $2.30. Not bad, but you can see how the target like just barely moved. I guess because of there was some significant price action, but this one's kind of looking a little bit dicey here. But here's the cool thing is, there's your trigger price, 32.20, and so couple of bucks profit on the target there, and then even if it does, like, sort of fail up here. Right. And what it's doing is it's trying to consolidate, these highs here. I mean, it's not a bad looking pattern at all. So we're kind of micro focused in on the current price action, but bigger scheme of things, this particular stock is sort of, consolidating all this. You can almost see like an inverse head and shoulders, and you know, if this thing is able to get some mojo going and break out of these highs here, it could be headed a lot higher. It could go into another big run. But anyway, so it is what it is. Not too exciting, but still, hey, you can't complain. It hit the target. Trailing stop is significantly above the target, and stock's looking pretty good. So moving on, here's one that this is another. So this chart to me is extraordinary because it's almost like almost every day is like a runaway sort of move, right? There's actually, well, I mean, there's only like one sort of breakaway gap, I guess you would call this, but just the way that the stock sort of took off here and like, well, here's what's extraordinary about it is these higher highs and lower highs in a row, right? It's very significant. All these days in a row. Um, you had a higher high and a higher low. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days in a row on that big run up there. And so it just ripped right through the target. So you can see back over here, like where it triggered in or whatever, wasn't too exciting. I mean, it had that really nice pattern, where it's in an uptrend. Then it had a nice sort of orderly pullback, right? Kind of based out right here, and so this is where the setup came in. And after it looked like it was turning the corner here, it kind of came back down a little bit, and yeah, a little pullback right there, right? I never did draw that uptrend line across those lows, but sometimes that's meaningful because, and in this case, like right here, that would have been meaningful to draw this uptrend line because obviously you wouldn't want it to break down there. So anyway, long story short, beautiful move higher here. Um, Current stop just under this sort of breakaway gap, 47.30 as of last night, and so looking pretty good here. This stock, this is I was talking about taking the price scale off, right? This is a very impressive run up, and if you didn't see that price scale on there, you'd think that this thing was, had really made a huge move or whatever, because it's more impressive than a couple of the other charts. But as of last night, this was up 12.5%. It's up another 0.5% right now, so that's 13% from the trigger price, right? And again, this one did sort of have a gap up here. Now, if you look at the price scale, you can see there's only quarter increments here. So this open was 43.76. So basically, 75 cents extra. Don't sweat the nickels, dimes, and quarters on the entry. You'd have had a full position if you split it in half right here as far as the entry goes. And so, you'd have a cost basis around 43 and a half. Could have easily compensated for that by adding 50 cents to your target, and there you go. So that's a beauty too. It was kind of some unusual price action right after the entry, but worked out pretty well. This one has been kind of choppy, but look at this. Yesterday finally hit the target, so looking pretty good. You had some really wild price action last week here, right? With these long range days, like 4 of them. Actually, it's two, like 6 in a row, right? These 6 days right here were just kind of wild and woolly, but at the same time, the stop was hanging back just enough so it didn't get knocked out, and there you go. So now it's trading at the target and looking pretty good. QLYS was up 7.5% as of yesterday's close, and it's up a little bit today, but and looking pretty good here. So it is what it is. And so now we're getting into the ones that have triggered more recently. See, those ones that have been open for a while, they've had a lot of time to sort of make their move, and and the system is designed sort of around the old age-old trading adage about cut your losers quickly and let your winners run, right? And so those ones that we looked at prior, they've been open for a month, and they've had time to open up and really run. And so that's the whole thing about letting your winners run. That's why we've got such extraordinary gains in a few of those. And so now we're getting into the ones that have only been open for a much shorter period of time. Here's Honeywell. Honeywell was a weird one because it gapped up. And so, here's the thing is the system is calculating an optimum trigger price, right? And that's what it does. It's using math. And so it doesn't it can't really compensate for, what a stock does. I mean, lots of certain stocks, I mean, they gap all over the place. And, of course, the market likes to make big moves overnight and stocks gap. And so, um, it is what it is. And so it doesn't really have any way of doing anything but figuring out like where's like sort of the barrier. What does the stock need to break through to. And so anyway, long story short, Honeywell had the gap up and it's starting to run up a little bit here. Let me see. The stop has not moved yet, which is very, very interesting. I've noticed that on a few of these newer open trades that the stop's still hanging back. I would expect, and like I said, it's a function of price and time. So I would expect this stop to probably come up to around where the trigger price was anytime now. It's a pretty good looking pattern, to be honest with you. It's one that actually, I mean, this thing's still well off the highs, but it's got this sort of cupping pattern going on here, right? Some of these charts and so, basically you could draw an uptrend line there. So I expect this stop to come up pretty quickly. Nothing too exciting there. Exxon Mobil, this is going to be an interesting one too because we're looking at XOP, right, which just triggered in, and so Exxon Mobil has got a very sort of similar pattern here, and basically, it's well off the highs, but um, it's starting to, some of these energy stocks are starting to look like they might want to turn around. So trading a little tiny bit below the trigger price here. Trailing stop still right here. So it's a pretty nice little consolidation. I can tell by looking at the chart that the next hurdle is yesterday's high. So these energy stocks, I mean, they had some pretty nice looking moves yesterday. It almost looked like yesterday seemed like one of those days where money was rotating out of the big tech stocks, the high growth momentum tech stocks into like energy and basic materials and maybe some value type things. Um, so anyways, we'll see what happens here. The stop on ExxonMobil is like way down at the bottom of the pattern, and so this is not a high beta stock that so you don't have to really sweat this. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it stops. He's kind of loose, but it's based on the pattern. But anyway, this is like a set it and forget it type of thing, right? So this thing could clang around in here between 42 and 45 for a long period of time, and then slowly start to trend up. But I'm sure it pays off. I haven't looked at the dividend just for the fun of it. Um, just for the fun of it, let me pull up and see what the dividend, the annual dividend is on ExxonMobil. It is, wow, 7.79% annual dividend. So that's pretty significant considering bonds are paying nothing, right? And so hey, that's even though people have been making a killing on some of these momentum stocks, I mean, there's something to be said for, almost an 8% dividend in a zero interest rate environment. So, just pretend that this stock, I mean, just hypothetically speaking, say that, this thing's starting to turn the corner and maybe, over the next couple of weeks it breaks back above here and starts going up and just say hypothetically that like over the longer period of time it never does break below this. Well, you could turn around in a year from now and the stock could be significantly higher. Could have collected an 8% dividend and just like left the stop. I mean, basically you'd want to move the stop obviously to break even at some point, but I guess the point of the matter is that this is probably like, obviously there's a little bit of discretion trading our system, and that's choosing which ones to get into. And so, you could be sitting around thinking, well, I'd really like to put some money to work and a decent value stock to hang on to for, the next couple of years. And so, hey, this could potentially work out. Um, and so the idea would be that, you don't have to like sell all of it, right? So theoretically, just suppose, again, hypothetically speaking, because, I have no idea what's going to happen here, and it may take a lot of time. The market could be getting ready to sell off, and this thing could tag this stop next week. But hypothetically speaking, um, now I lost my train of thought. But yeah, this thing could be in for, a longer term recovery. I guess that's what I was shooting for. Kind of like our recovery stocks, right? Go look at that recovery list. I mean, that's something that one of these days I'll have to get Jeffrey on the show and we'll talk about the recovery list, because absolutely amazing how the recovery list, the stocks on there have done. They've just, and this one might actually been on there. I don't know if I marked that or not, but I mean, I'm gonna say that almost all of those recovery stocks hit, at least one, the first target, if not the second target, and completely recovered. I mean, just absolutely amazing. So, and those were designed to be longer term type of things. And so, in theory, you could use this as like sort of an entry point. Oh, I know what I was going to say is you're using your discretion on which stocks to actually choose from the list. I mean, you don't have to be holding all of them, and so you could pass on something like this if you're more short-term oriented, and and like the big action and the high beta stocks. This would just be too boring for you. But on the second hand, and so which leads me to the next open trade, which is Boeing. Same sort of thing here. Um, so Boeing triggered in, and then actually Boeing like closed above the trigger price this day, which was a week ago today, right? And so the following morning, um, you know, there would have been the entry according to the guidelines of the system. So let's see the open price there, 184.50. Right. And so interestingly enough, like it kind of sold down and started to rally, and then it had another sell down, but it's got this really nice pivot low right here. And see here, just going back to what I was saying before, the system doesn't know anything about the news, right? So like you see bad news on Boeing and you think, oh geez, it should sell off. But quite frankly, I mean you got a pivot low right there. And so um and ever so subtly, and I'm not trying to make a case for it. I mean, the system is just basing all this off of the pattern, but ever so subtly, you got these higher lows here. So you got this series of higher lows. You got this pivot low here, and I mean, even though it's still just down a little bit, and this thing's only been open for today's day 5, right? So, and the stop is in a very reasonable spot right there, right? It's not like you're taking a whole lot of risk on this. So, yeah, we'll see what happens with this. Now, just using my technical analysis skills here, I can look at this sucker and say, hey, it really needs to break out of this pattern here to the upside, and so, there could be somebody out there saying, well, this is a premature entry because it needs to break out of here. But at the same time, this particular day here, it could have easily just busted out and kept going, so you didn't know. And so, the system determined that this particular day was significant enough of a pattern break or whatever, significant enough price action to trigger it in. And so there's where we are here. So Boeing needs to bust out here. Quite frankly, a breakout of this pattern and a move over this high, you could add to your position because Boeing has a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential here for a significant recovery. So again, going back to what I was saying with Exxon Mobil, I mean these are brand name big cap. I mean I guess you could call them value stocks. If there is a rotation from momentum to value, these two might. You know, as long as the market holds together. these two could benefit from that. And so this could end up being, like just an absolute great sort of entry point. And if not, that's what the stop's for. So only two more left. I'm going to jam through those real quick. Well, actually, one more left because we already looked at the one triggering today. So last but not least, MNTA. Here's an example. It's probably, at all these things, it's probably good to have an example of one that's, does not really, doesn't look like it's going to work, right? This thing looks like it's going to get stopped out today. So that'll happen. Not every single pick can go on to be one of those big gainers, and so it's kind of a weird. This thing's kind of loopy to begin with, but it is what it is. So, um, I mean, these long range bars, and these big up and down moves. So look at it's still in an uptrend, but it just looks like this was kind of like a false sort of breakout. Sometimes you see like a move like this. That was a nice reversal bar, and then that gap up, and it just barely closed above the trigger. I mean, that day just barely closed above it, and then sometimes you see the pullback on Monday. Had a decent little reversal day, but just didn't get any more traction to the upside. So this one looks like it has a pretty decent chance of tagging that stop, but all in all, and that's obviously, there's another reason why you want to diversify. So stop outs here and there on the ones that, and goes back to what I was saying a minute ago. Cut your losers short, let your winners run. So if one of the, if some of these things don't work when they trigger in, like maybe you get some stocks that trigger in right before a big market correction, which we haven't seen in a long time. Um, then you're gonna get stopped out, but no big deal because over the series you'll latch onto some of those humongous winners, and so here you go. Here's XOP. Um, just revisiting this. Look at how it's rallied back up from the lows when I was looking at it originally, and so this thing could trigger in today if it moves. It's got to hit the high of the day, but if it moves over 52.90. So it closed over the trigger price yesterday. So it's officially a valid candidate. The only thing is the following day it has to trade over the trigger again, which, like I said, 90% of the time they do. So anyway, hope that was a little bit educational. Basically just kind of reviewed the open trades and where they are. And so, these I'm gonna say these are kind of few and far between, but a stock moving 80%, over 80% in literally like um, a month's. This thing's been open for 1 month, a month's time. That's just sort of the environment we're in, right? And and so especially like I mean lately there's been a lot of like crazy moves, big moves in some of these stocks, just nuts, like the big cap stocks or whatever, but it's not always like that, right? The market is not always like that. You go through lots of periods of time where if you're looking for 80% moves, that's typically in like real low price stocks or whatever. So but there you go. That's LRN is probably the biggest gainer that we've seen since we started this whole thing, and just amazing. So real nice tight stop up there, and like I said before, most of these things are going to get closed. At least half of these are going to get closed over the next couple of weeks ahead of earnings, and that's if they don't get closed first by tagging the trailing stops, which are trailing up fairly tight nowadays. So, anyhow, thanks for joining me for the show. Appreciate you tuning in, and I'm going to wrap it up, and I will see you guys here next week.